In this video, which is part 2 of our 3-part series on data screening and cleaning, we're going to be covering how to determine the accuracy of your data set. And what this essentially means is, are the data values feasible and reasonable for whatever it is that we're measuring? And so there's a couple ways we can define what we mean by feasible or reasonable. And probably the first and simplest is, depending on what it is you're measuring, does the value make sense? Does it fall within the actual realm of possible values that we can see for whatever it is we're measuring? So the simplest example would be if we're measuring the percentage of questions you got correct on an exam, we know that that can only range between 0 and 100%. So if we had a value in our data set that was 120%, we know that's not possible because of how we've operationally defined our variable. Other examples might be, if we're measuring somebody's age in years, and there's an age in there that's 150, we know that that's possible theoretically. We also know that it's not really feasible because we know the oldest measured person alive is about 119 years old. So those are ways we can begin to kind of determine what is feasible. And it's good to have established for yourself, using the operational definition of your variable that you're measuring, what is the feasible range. So we know that theoretically there could be a very wide range of values depending on what we're measuring, but what is the actual feasible, reasonable range we would expect? And also another definition of this might be, if we're trying to limit our participants based upon certain inclusion criteria. So for example, if we only want to include people in our data set that are between the ages of 18 and 45, if we end up with someone who has an age of 50, well, that's a feasible, reasonable age, but that doesn't fit our operational definition for our variable. And so we don't want to use that value. So there's a couple different ways to define what we mean by feasible and reasonable. And so you've got to kind of define that for yourself as you set up your data collection process. But that's what we're doing here in this particular part of the process, is looking for values that make sense. Are they accurate? Are they feasible? Are they reasonable? Do they fit our operational definition for what we're trying to do? And so how we typically check this is when we run our descriptive statistics for our particular variable, we're going to look at the minimum and maximum score that's presented. So that's part of the descriptives. The software will identify the minimum score in the data set and the maximum score, or the highest and lowest scores. And we can look at those scores and see if they fall within our feasible range. So again, if we're setting a feasible range for age between 18 and 45, and we see the maximum score is 50 and we have a minimum score of 16, then we know we've got two values that don't fit. And so we're going to have to determine how to deal with those. And so if we do identify values that are inaccurate, we want to go back to our original data source and verify for that particular participant or individual what their actual value should be based upon what we've done. So we want to check our original data sheet or source. And if we find that the data has been entered incorrectly, which is another common reason we see inaccurate data, we want to impute the correct value. So if someone has an age of 50, but we go back and find out, nope, that age is really supposed to be 44, we can go and change it. Now, if we can't do that, if we don't have the original data, or it does appear that a mistake's been made, or this is data that does not fit our operational definition, then we can essentially trim those individuals from further analysis by essentially deleting their score from our data or excluding them from the analysis. Now, this is usually appropriate if we have between 5 and 10% of our subjects that have inaccurate data values. We can do that without having to worry too much about significantly affecting the data set in a way that would then affect further analysis that we might do. It's still going to be a representative data set. But if we have a smaller sample size and we've got a fair number of missing subjects, then that could create some bias if we eliminate them, even though they do have inaccurate values. So we want to, if that's the case, we might have to consider adding additional subjects or finding a way to find out the true value for that individual, retest them, regather the data, whatever it might be. So those are some of the basic principles behind what we're doing with accuracy of the data set. So let's now take a look at how we would do this within Intellectus. So here we are within Intellectus, and we're going to be working with just one variable, but we can do this for multiple variables simultaneously if we chose to do so. We're going to be working with this reading number 2 variable. And so if I want to identify if I have accurate values, again, I need to make sure I understand what my operational definition is for accurate values. And so we're going to pretend, just for the sake of demonstration here, that the possible scores for this scale can only range between 0 and 100. And so we're using that then as our operational definition for what is feasible or reasonable. So the first thing we want to do is go to the Analyses menu and then go to the Descriptives option and choose Descriptives. And we're going to choose our reading number 2 variable. And then we're going to click Confirm and click Calculate. And so here, again, we've got our summary table for reading number 2. We can see the mean, the standard deviation, the number of participants that we have, and then we see the minimum and maximum score. And so remember, we had determined or defined the range of feasible, reasonable scores is between 0 and 100. And we can see we don't have any scores below 0 or less than 0, so that's good. But we do have at least one score that exceeds our feasible maximum. So we said our feasible maximum is 100, and we have at least one score that appears to be above 100. Okay? So we know we're going to have to do something about this. So in order to deal with this, we're going to go back to our actual data. Okay, and here's our reading number 2. And so we've got the easiest way to find these values that might be outside of our range, especially if we're dealing with a lot of participants, is to have the variable rescale itself in order from highest value to lowest value. And then we can very easily see the values that are outside of our feasible range. And so how we do this is at the very top, we can see there's a label for each variable. We can see the letter B for this particular variable and these little up-down arrows that are present. If we click on those, that will reorganize the data just for that variable, in this case from lowest to highest value. And if you click on it again, it'll rearrange it from highest to lowest value. So we can see here are our participants that have scores that are outside of our feasible range. So we've got 2 scores of 103, 1 score of 102, and another score of about 101.5. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, we don't have any way to verify what their actual scores would have been or were. So we're just going to trim them from any further analysis. We're going to basically delete their scores and pretend that they didn't occur, and we're just going to have to do the analysis without those 4 particular scores. So the easiest way to do this would be to go into the Management menu under Edit Data. We're going to have to have it reorder it for us again by using a little arrow at the top, and we can see here's our 4 values. So we just highlight that cell, click Delete, and do that for each of the cells that we want to trim or eliminate. We then reorder the data. Reorder the data, and then we click Save. And now we've got data with those missing values trimmed, and now we can go on with additional assessment, knowing that we have all our data points in this particular data set are all accurate and feasible data points. So again, this is the second step, and this is usually done after we've checked for completeness of data. So now at this point, we know we've got complete data, we've got accurate data that meets the feasible range that we've defined for ourselves previously. So hopefully you found this video useful, and good luck using it in your own research.